Okay, I'm going to start recording now. It's on.
Great. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from April 21st?
Motion
Move
to approve.
to second.
Second.
Second. Oh yeah. Delays.
Echo chamber. I think the base is covered, Don.
Okay. May I have a motion
For what?
to approve the minutes?
We just gave you a motion and we seconded it.
Okay. That was, I blinked and
Together.
so we'll vote on this now. Councilor Caterina, are you in favor?
Yes.
Councilor Hayes?
Yes.
And I also am in favor. That's a unanimous approval of the minutes, 3-0. So the only discussion item we have this evening is reviewing the ad hoc process for the downtown district. And I know we've got to work on a shorter name and an acronym both, because it's a mouthful. But thanks to Tom and Peter for taking this one on. So I think, guys, we'll just turn it over to you, and we'll conduct a discussion around that.
I need to give Peter all the credit in the world. He's the one who's drafted this, the starting point. So thank you, Peter, for doing that. And admittedly, I just took some time this afternoon to look through it. So I haven't had any suggestions yet, but I think I will have some as it gets more mature. Would it be helpful to give a little background? And I'll give it from my perspective, having been in the room in these negotiations and what was the purpose of this. This is one of the three processes that's provided for or called out for in the CEA with Crossroads for the Downs. And this one in particular, through the whole discussion, there was a lot of community interest, and I think interest on the part of council and staff about the downtown piece. In fact, some might say that the downtown is so integral to what they're doing, it's everything. And so it became abundantly clear that there were different definitions or visions of what that might be or might not be. And I got to be honest, I had a concern, and still do, if left to their own devices, the things that they might choose to do might fall way short of what our expectations are. And so I see John Cloutier is connected by audio.
Good.
So the point of this is that we didn't want to sidetrack and get into this discussion, and appreciated it really needed many voices, community members included, to really start to understand what that is. We also recognize that a number of things that probably make a downtown special are things that they would not do themselves, such as designate acres of land for a town square, or who knows, renovate the grandstand. I don't know if that's a good idea, but that was one of the things that was talked about. Those sorts of spaces don't return on investment, frankly. And so for all those reasons, we just kind of said, let's just agree to have a process to better understand this. And that's kind of the backdrop from my perspective. Peter, does that make sense given your recollection?
Yeah, absolutely. And all I've done here is, again, Tom sent me the document as sort of a framework of what we did for the community center. So, we had said that process sort of works. So I just kind of mirrored that and changed some of the language. So this is just a rough first draft. I think probably what we want to pay a lot of attention to would be what should be the makeup of the committee once we get there, to reflect what Tom just said. If we're really talking about a downtown area, what's the expertise we're going to need on that committee to kind of inform us about things we might want to think about. I would guess that's one of the more important aspects of what this is. I know, the public safety building, it was a pretty good mixture of talent and people that did it. I think people were pretty happy with the community center committee, that it was a pretty good blend of talents that stepped forward. So anyway, this is just a placeholder for a draft for us to start working through. Tom, if I heard your message, we had 5 years. We're now kind of 2 years in, right? To the
Yeah,
process.
I do have, I have your work, and also I have the CEA. I can share screen and we can look at the language ourselves in real time. Is that helpful at all?
Sure, yep.
Let me try to,
While you do that, Tom, I was just going to say that we had 5 years to do this. We're probably 2 years in. So I was just building on your,
Yep.
Probably makes some sense to get started sooner than later.
Yeah, and to that point, Peter, and that's not what I'm doing. They are marching right along. You know, they just received their so-called phase 3, the approval. I think they're now looking at downtown north where the WEX facilities to go. And so they are very quickly creeping into this area. And I fear that we'll be playing catch up like we have been since day one on this if we don't get out in front of it and maybe be the aggressor. I fear they're going to make some decisions that will be irreversible sooner than later. So I think for all those reasons, it does make perfect sense that we start talking now. Let me try this again.
Did you go into share screen? Tom?
I did. And I'm just trying to, I'm having difficulty here.
Did you move what you want to share up to the
Yeah, I have it active on my
basic? Yeah, it's at,
I do have it active here.
so click on it.
No, I don't see it. That's my problem. Sorry.
Yeah.
And we,
I can, Peter's quite right. We have essentially 5 years to accomplish this. And so we're well within our time frame at this point. And I think if we can advance something by summer's end and have a committee convened, we should be in very good shape.
Tom, once the end of the 5-year period, that would be a good thing to start with.
Let me grab
Sorry.
this.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm making you, don't worry about it if you have to go.
Now, the CEA was signed on December 12th, 2018.
Okay, so it's 2023.
Yes.
Okay,
So I'm not going to try to share any further.
yeah,
I'm not
okay.
having success. I'm sorry. So they're actually moving quicker than I think we all expected. The 5-year window we thought would give ample time, and here we are, have initiated, one of these and are pushing for a second process as well. But I think the difference here, I really would love the town to be the initiator of this as opposed to being invited in at the 11th hour and feeling catch up the whole time. It's not the way to do things.
great. Thanks, Tom. Jean Marie or others, any comments on the, on the concept so far or on the document itself? I had a couple of questions.
I have a couple of discrepancies I saw.
Go right ahead.
Well, one is the under the where 1, 2, 3, the fourth whereas when we're talking about no later than the end of CEA year 5, and then the date is given as March 31st, 2024. That's why I asked Tom about, because it sounds like it should be 2023 anyway.
Peter, did you lift that? You must have cut and pasted that language, didn't you?
Well, I mean, what I took what was in the, and that was in the original document, the March date. So I didn't change that date. I just took what was in the document for the community.
So we
center.
may want it. That's just a date we may want to look, make sure.
Yeah, no.
Right. And then the other thing that just popped out at me was under membership. It says committee shall be appointed by town council. It says comprise 13 members, and it says 9 of which are voting members. But then underneath it says, although official membership is limited to 7. So there's a discrepancy there.
Yeah, that was a drafting problem. You remember that was the last minute change
Right,
from the community.
right. Those were the only things that just jumped out at me.
Going back to that whereas clause that Jean Marie, Peter simply lifted the language right out of the CEA so that March 31, 2024 is in fact the so-called CEA year 5. That is the critical date. The last sentence, however, is a partial sentence and I think needs to be dropped. Peter, you also picked up just the first couple of sentences on the next provision of the CEA. So it says section 1.8.15 community center process.
Yeah.
So just that last 2 lines needs to be dropped from there.
And then, Peter, dropping down in the next whereas, the last sentence there, I think, is also, there's some redundant language. The town council wishes to fully explore this opportunity using the resources of the community to fully explore,
Oh, right.
so
Yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah.
nits, these, not major things. One other thing I was going to mention on the next page, we talk about findings and recommendations to the town council. I mean, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to be, to be more specific there, or to put some time frame, on that. So there,
Where are you?
Where
Dan?
are you?
under public involvement, it's the next page. It's the third bullet.
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
And then you go to public presentation. I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to be a little more explicit. And Betsy, her hand raised, Tom.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I have my head buried in
No, I
the
just,
document.
and Paul's on too, I guess. So but they're both muted and no video.
I'm here. I can hear
Hear
you.
me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? I'm at no video, which is fine. So I apologize if you already answered this or it's in the document because I haven't had time to study it yet, but is there going to be a monetary amount set aside with this for, say a professional town planner to advise the board? I mean, we got into the ad hoc committee and then all at once, they wanted money, or they needed money to do, to hire a consultant group. Has that been looked at, and is that something that the downtown TIF money can be spent on, to hire consultants? I think it is, but it's been a while since I've looked at it. And then would this committee be coming back also with any kind of budget numbers, as I'm assuming putting together a downtown isn't free? So those are my questions. Thank you.
I think the answer to your question, Betsy, is no. This document at this point doesn't contemplate any of that. So I think that's a great question for us to discuss. Because certainly for community center, what do we end up doing? 15,000 or something for consulting?
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. I do
So,
recall there's a recognition or a directive to the committee here that says if they need professional help, they are to come to the council immediately and ask for that. Similar, and that's the language through which the community center group came forward with. But to answer Betsy's question, there's no resources currently in the FY21 budget to fund such a request. And I'll look further, but I suspect it could be interpreted to use TIF, our TIF revenues that we've started to receive for that purpose.
I'm sorry, Tom, now you're thinking we could use those funds for that purpose?
Yeah, I need to look more
Okay.
specifically at the language, but I think that would not be too far a stretch. So I guess my point is, I don't think we need money budgeted in the, an earmark in the budget. I think that if you find yourself needing professional help, and that's a pretty likely scenario. These things are, there's many good failed examples across the country of folks trying to do the same thing. You can't just build it and expect they'll come. There's got to be some real key ingredients. And to me, the key ingredient is people. So what brings people? It's activities all hours of the day and night. So you need someone with some specialized expertise. It's not just infrastructure per se.
Do we have any sense of timing on this, Peter or Tom, on, when we'd like this to go, or what the next steps might be on this? And I don't mean to cut short the discussion or further edits and comments.
I mean, in all likelihood, we probably would be lucky to have a committee convened by end of summer, to be honest.
Okay,
I would think they would probably need 6 months anyway,
okay.
maybe longer. So there is a paragraph number 3 called time frame. That's probably where you ought to include. This continues to hold, or Peter, you must have updated that number, right? December 31, 21.
Yeah, but that's again, that may be late, based on what you're saying. if we do get them, if we do get it organized this summer and we give them 9 months, you know, it's conceivable they could do it by 21, right?
Yeah.
December 21.
Yeah, I mean, it could be this time next year. That seems ample time.
So one other thought I had on the runway up to this December date that we're discussing. You know, we had and this is, I don't want to, you know, I'll defer to Jean Marie on this from an ordinance committee standpoint, but we've got a June meeting to go through the GMO, the growth management ordinance, and it does seem that this is something that would parallel pretty closely with that potentially. So, you know, there may be some synergy there, trying to get both of these things lined up and maybe over the summer and then, you know, go from there. So I don't want to overload people. And I know we're going to be moving to one meeting a month schedules, but I just throw that out there.
Just a point of reference, when you said September, what is the selection process for the committee? Was a good month process probably? By the time we got applications out and got it back and we debated it as a council. So that really means if we're going to be up and running in September, we got to have the names sort of collected by end of July.
Right, and you really need to have your committee charge, I think, fully fleshed out so people know what they're getting into, you know, and you can match up the expertise that you think you need to accomplish the scope of work. So your point's well taken, and I really encourage you to build on the success that the council had with the community center selection process. That produced some tremendous results in terms of locking yourselves in the room here, and I think going through a fairly methodical review of candidates who expressed interest, their skill sets, and kind of matching up a bunch of different areas of expertise really worked out well.
Yeah, Tom, I would
How
add.
long was that process, Tom? Remind me.
I'm trying to think, I think Peter's right, probably about a month soak time. By the time we had the committee formed, we put the charge out to the community, hey, tell us if you're interested. We received their materials. And then it, you know, took the council probably a couple of weeks to convene and kind of work through that process. So it's probably 4 to 6 weeks, start to finish.
And Tom, I see Betsy's got another question here. While you're tuning her in, I would, you know, compliment you and the council for how effective that was. I remember that session in your conference room, you know, of doing the selection. I think everyone felt it was very fair and open and balanced, and we worked hard at getting a good cross section of representation, you know, from various groups in the community. So, you know, all of those things were really key success factors that for us to repeat.
Agreed.
Didn't we score them ahead of time? Was that part of the process that we looked at the applications and we all kind of, because that really sped it along, because we kind of focused on the top scoring candidates from our perspectives.
Yeah, my recollection, there might have been 2/3 of folks that were kind of in common with everyone, and then the final decision was just the few handful of remaining ones.
Yep.
So go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, no, go ahead, sorry.
So would it be appropriate for me to, for a motion in terms of timing for revising this process and trying to schedule next steps?
Would you all want a little more time to look at the draft and offer your own comments so we can come up with one that more fairly represents input from all?
Sure.
So we could schedule this for your next meeting, and between now and then, we all have the task of looking at it and providing comments. I can share it out so folks can, you know, just putting it as a Google document, or I think it's a Word document right now, so we could share that and people can contribute comments and ideas.
Okay. So can I get a motion for that?
You broke up. I didn't hear.
Ask for a motion for that in terms of,
So moved.
and a second?
Motion, yeah.
So the motion, as I understand it, is to get revisions to to Tom on this document, and maybe Tom can do a Google Doc that we can all
Sure.
work on, and we'll turn that and make sure that's an agenda item for the next meeting. And I think at that next meeting, I'd also like to suggest that we have a pro forma timeline and, and some milestones having to do with launching the committee and also trying to target an initial meeting potentially, perhaps at year end. So
When's our next meeting?
our next meeting would be in July. I don't have the date, but probably the first week of July.
Because July 6th is the first Monday, if I'm looking at this right. Yeah.
I think it's Friday the 4th, the day off for the 4th.
Yeah. So Monday the 6th would be the next regularly scheduled.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
6th? All right. So
But Don, as we're discussing the motion, I don't know if you want to, Paul's here, Betsy's here, John's here, so it's pretty much the full council, but it would probably be helpful if the full council also saw it prior to that July, so they could also, and the thing I think we should really give some careful thought to is, again, the membership piece. Are there specific skill sets we're looking for? And so if someone's got some ideas about what that should be, that'd be really helpful. That maybe we could modify that section to say we want someone with, development, experience. I don't know what it is, but I think it'd be really key to identify what skills we might need.
okay. So I'll take that on as a to-do in terms of sending out a note to the council and trying to be specific about what we'd like them to do between now and the next meeting. Well, I'll set a date so we'll have a chance to get their feedback and turn it around and get it into something to present for the next ANC meeting the first week of July. But I'll do that.
Can I ask also, because I like to work backwards from a goal.
Yeah.
When do we want to have these people all up and running? Because then you can work back from that to the process. In other words, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Are we looking for, part of what I'm thinking in my head is October 1st or October 15th, somewhere in there.
So you commission them October 1 and you look for them to have a first meeting by year end, something like that?
Yeah. And the other thing I'm thinking of, because of course like me, I've got summer on the mind because I didn't have any vacation this year, but that's my problem, is I think you're going to see other people, and I don't want to miss the opportunity if we're looking for folks to not have it in the so-called high weeks of summer, because people be otherwise, they're taking vacation time or, whatever. So I would think that we could get real serious about this probably, I don't know, mid-August potentially. First 2 weeks of August are usually high vacation time for most people.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there. So how do you build a timeline around that so that we know we've got to have, this done by here, we got to have that by there, and we're going to meet here. In other words, or should we be building that timeline for our next meeting?
I'll take a stab at that for the next
Okay.
meeting. I'll send a note to everybody and ask for them for input.
Okay.
I'll try to get the straw model out to folks before we convene again
Okay.
in committee.
Yeah, just on that point, if I could, I think that's a really good thought to keep in mind here. We really need to hit that window between Labor Day and I'll say first or second week of October. After that, it's the black hole of election time.
Right.
So you've got 4 or 5 weeks of productivity, when people are back from vacation or schools are back in session,
Right.
God willing. And people are paying attention, but then as a body and as a town, we get kind of lost in elections. And I think this election is going to be hell on wheels is my prediction. So if we can get this stuff tied up and a committee appointed by mid-October, I think that would be that's the outside goal.
So what I'll do in trying to rough out this straw model for us to kick around the next meeting, I'll reach out to the folks that were involved in the, in the community center committee and ask them, for suggestions on what worked, what they do differently, try to draw from that.
Okay.
include that in our piece. So,
Yeah, because they ended up asking for extensions, as I recall.
Mm.
So we don't want to box people in too much. You don't want to give them too much time.
Yeah.
But you also don't want to have them so boxed in that they're freaking out and aren't being effective. So,
we gave them deadlines and then they realized that they needed more data.
yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone knew the deadline we gave them was probably almost impossible at
Yeah.
the outset. But
Yeah.
again, we were working under the gun. You know, the gun was to our head. So if we can avoid that, that just brings up a point that we ought to be just mindful of the fact that this is not a insular process. This contemplates involvement by the developer.
Yeah.
So maybe getting this process a little more refined and sharing it with them and getting their input would be advisable.
Yep.
Probably timeline is the biggest issue that we ought to make sure that we're thinking the same way.
Yeah.
And I guess the final piece, I would look to them to bring some expertise to the table. I wouldn't want to rely entirely on that, but they have some design professionals that will presumably, be working toward the same goal here.
Yep. Great idea. Great point. So we'll go with that. I don't know that we need a formal motion. I think I understand pretty well what we want to get done in the next days. And then we'll just turn it a couple times from there to get into the fall cycle.
Yeah, if we can get budget done, I can spend some time on this. I just been preoccupied.
So are there any comments? I'm going to make sure we wrap up here on time. Any more comments from the folks that are watching in? Betsy, John, Paul, if you'd like to say anything. Otherwise, we'll get other suggestions for next meeting's agenda. We have on there already this item. We had also queued up from Tom the review of committees, potential committee consolidation. I'd suggest maybe we put that back on the agenda. I'm not anticipating we'll have an executive session at the next, following the next ANC meeting. So any other ideas for agenda items?
No, I think that's a pretty full agenda actually for the,
Okay.
especially if we're still doing it by Zoom.
All right.
Yep.
So with that, can I look for a motion to adjourn? And we will convene an executive session. We'll be looking in our emails for Paul Johnson to send us a separate Zoom executive session, town council.
Yeah.
Paul, can you confirm?
Yeah, I just sent it to everybody. Yep.
And Liam Gallagher, can you make
Yep.
sure
The,
he's
the
included?
council and Liam. Yep. They have it. You guys all have it sitting there. I'll see you in a minute.
Thanks.
Yeah. I make a motion that we move to act on a request for an executive session pursuant to Title I MRSA 4056D to discuss labor negotiations with Scarborough Professional Dispatches Unit of Scarborough Firefighter Association IAFF number 3894, not to return to public session.
Second?
Okay, all those, I'm going to do a roll call. Peter Hayes,
Yes.
Jean Marie,
Yes.
Don Hamill is a yes, that's unanimous. So we will now close this as Jean Marie is described in the motion. And I would ask for someone to keep an eye at the start time for the executive session. And I think Paul will open that as chair, right?
Yes, he will.
Yeah.
He'll be host and he'll open it for you.
Great.
Okay. See you in a minute.
Very much, everybody.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you.